Welcome back to Under Oath. Today we have writer and film critic Shawn Levy. Shawn, can you hear me?
I can. Good morning.
You know, I know you just did the biography of Clint Eastwood. I believe it's called Clint, the Man in the Movies. That's a pretty big dude to go after.
Yeah, I mean, that's the type of person you want to write a book about, who has a notable career and other aspects of his life that are interesting. In Clint's case, politics. He's a businessman. He's been a sportsman. He's a symbol. Very few actors achieve that sort of iconic status, truly iconic. If there's a Mount Rushmore of actors, Clint would have to be a strong candidate, to be on it. And there are actors I like and actors I enjoy, but they don't have all that stuff around them. So for my money, you need more than just a great acting career to be a worthy subject of a book.
I wonder, I know when you say the acting, but he's a pretty boss director too.
He's a great director. I'll tell you, he's got a 70-year acting career and a 50-year directing career, and nobody in Hollywood has done that. And he's got 2 Best Picture Oscars, 2 Best Director Oscars. That's more than Scorsese or Spielberg. It's just and the films range the decades. Play Misty for Me, Pale Rider, Unforgiven, Mystic River, Sully. Those are each from a different decade. And he had a movie last year at age 94, Juror Number 2, that was really quite good.
When I think about the stuff done, and this is a tough issue because I can't imagine how tough it was for him to be conservative in Hollywood. I mean, I can't even imagine running up that mountain.
Well, one thing, he doesn't live in Los Angeles. He lives in Carmel, California, about 5 hours, 8 hours drive away. So I think he kind of isolated himself from an environment where he might have run into more resistance or quarrels. But he's also not a hardline anything. He's a capital L libertarian. If I had to say what he was, you find him, he favors deregulation of business and a strong national defense, but he supported the Brady Bill. Dirty Harry supported the Brady Bill for handgun control. He's been a conservationist and a wildlife advocate his entire life. He has, argued for equal treatment of queer actors and women and equal pay to everybody on his crews, regardless of who they are in society. So you spot check him on any single political issue, you might be surprised at what you find.
I mean, do you think that people, when you say he's a libertarian, and I was looking at that too, and, I don't really play politics, but I can tell you, I can't even imagine, because every time I think of him, I imagine that moment where he's doing the empty chair at the RNC, and I'm going, does Hollywood forgive that?
If you look back on that, I watched it, of course, to write the book. And in 2008, it seemed like he was up there with a flamethrower. And in the heat of the campaign, it seemed like he's disrespecting Barack Obama. But if you look at it now, it's the most fascinating thing. He praises Obama at Romney's convention for some of the decisions he made. He barely mentions Romney until almost 10 minutes into the speech. And he does this improv with a chair. And my partner used to be a performer, and she watched it with me, and she said, that's an acting exercise that we used to do when I was coming up, and pretend there's someone in the chair. And it was such a strange evening that after the convention shut down for that night, there were people on Fox News suggesting that he was, in fact, an Obama supporter who was there to sandbag Mitt Romney. So, I remembered it one way, and then when I looked back at it, I was like, oh, this is far more subtle than I recalled.
So we think he might have been a plant. That's what we're probably thinking.
I'm certain he voted for Mitt Romney, and he said in about 2018 that he had never voted for a Democrat as president. I don't know how he voted in the last 2 elections, but if you look at it, there's a shot of the candidate's wife, Ann Romney, in the crowd while the audience is going nuts for Clint, and she does not look happy.
Yeah, I can't even imagine that. That must have just been a terror. Now, what I love about biographies is there's always that titillating issue. You got to have at least, I guess, 5 or 10 of those, and you can only share like half of them because you want people to read the book. You go, I can't. You got to read the book to see this. Now, isn't there? As a writer, I get away with jokes in my books. I also write comic books and do stand up, and there's a line I try to come up to. I guess as a biographer, there is no line.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I will sometimes write something, and as I'm writing it and amusing myself, I'm thinking the editor's going to strike this out, but I like this joke anyhow. One of the things I'm fortunate in is as a film critic, and I worked at a newspaper doing this in Portland, Oregon for 20 plus years. I include reviews of the films in the book. So every film he appears in as an actor or every film that he directed, there's at least a few sentences and in some cases a couple of pages of sort of critical analysis. And in there you can get away with jokes because that's clearly like the opinion section. But, sometimes it's just I see a joke. I have a dark and kind of twisted sense of humor, and I know, like professionally, I have to put my pro reporter hat on and not my jester hat, and do the job at hand and save the other for cocktail parties.
I love that concept. And being a film critic, I guess you're used to the people I don't want to call it criticizing, but critiquing. I guess you're used to them maybe being upset with you. I mean, what do you think if he had an opportunity to read your book? You think he would be happy, or you think he'd go, another one of these damn things?
Probably the latter would, he would say, oh, not again. I mean, there is a bookcase of books on him, not all biographies, a lot of, Clint and the West, or, the books about, his role as a policeman in a number of films. But I think that this book tries to be fair. There were 2 biographies of him published in the 90s. And in one, he spoke to the author at length, his whole life story, basically. And the book is so fawning that even though you're a fan, you're like, okay, he was a bad guy in this relationship, and here you are, you're blaming it on the lawyer. And then there's a book written a few years later that's so damning of everything, of his person, of his work, of his acting, of his directing. I thought, why did you write such a long book about someone you so dislike? And I've had that experience, and I won't do it again. I'll only let someone I respect and admire and sort of care about in my head for 3 years. And in Clint's case, I thought, oh, I can walk right down the middle between these 2 books. And I think if he saw that, he would say, well, fair, that's fair. I'm not happy the way this ended, but, it's fair to say it ended that way, that sort of thing.
Now, the question is this. If I read this book, am I going to like him?
I think so. I think I point out things that he did that, if I did it or my sons did it, I'd have to have a talk. But,
little talk with Clint. Clint, you need to sit down. We got to have this little discussion.
Yeah. But you know what I'm saying? Like stuff that, we weren't making our best choices. We weren't being our best selves. We all have that in our lives. And, he's a public figure. So that's it. The idea that it's reported on comes with the dinner of being a star. But I think that it's fair. And if nothing else, you're going to admire him as a creative artist. Somebody who at 94 feels like I own Pebble Beach golf links, but I'm going to go make a movie. That's how I'm going to spend my days. And hats off. That's a tough job on a 25-year-old's metabolism. A 95-year-old, wow.
Yeah, I can't imagine that. Now, Clint, I'm not upset with you. I'm just disappointed. I mean, I guess you could have that conversation. I think. The problem I have is I get the opportunity to interview a lot of celebrities. A lot of them, probably 300-400 already, directors, producers. And, some of them just, I think, drank their own Kool-Aid too much. They've been given so much, and so many people show appreciation that they don't see the line. And I mean, do you think that had something to do with it?
Actors are slightly different from athletes. Athletes get identified when they're like 7, 8 years old and they're singled out and they get a lot of praise. Every actor you and I can name lost out on a role, lost out on some opportunity. And Clint had a terrible start to his career. He was in terrible movies. His first picture was the sequel to The Creature of the Black Lagoon, and he plays a lab assistant, and the director didn't even want to shoot the scene, and he came up the hard way. So I think he appreciates everything he has, but it's possible that after being sort of kicked in the teeth a bunch of times and an actor breaks through, that suddenly they think, yeah, I earned this, I deserve it. And they don't sometimes understand how slender the line is between success and failure. And, I feel sorry for those folks. Some of them are charmed, they're Mr. Magoo. They walk over the manhole cover just when someone's coming up and they, step on their head. But I respect the ones who, I've written a book about Paul Newman, Clint Eastwood. I think those guys had their feet on the ground and know, hey, man, I'm very lucky to have this profession in this life and take none of it for granted.
Now, we mentioned his last two movies. We've got Juror 2. And I brought up the politics because I'm wondering, Warner Brothers barely supported the 2021 movie Cry Macho or Juror 2, and they only put that in limited release. Do you think the studio's trying to retire him?
I think they're making a mistake of that sort. Cry Macho was made and released basically during COVID. And, Clint's audience, particularly for Cry Macho, is an older audience and people were still, leery of going out into public spaces. And, I think that film, was just an unfortunate, sort of victim of history. But the way they handled Juror number 2, they got rave reviews when they played it at a small film festival in Los Angeles. And they not only didn't release it to more than, I think, 25 or 30 screens nationwide, they didn't report the grosses. And they said they didn't want to embarrass him. And I think it backfired. I think people looked at the studio and said, you don't know what you're doing. And it's true that these studios these days are built for a different type of vehicle. They're meant, we're either making $1 billion or nothing. And Clint makes small movies on a small budget, fast, on time, under budget. And if they make 1.5 times what they cost, that's a hit. It's not a mega hit. You're not going to buy, Boeing on the proceeds of it, but it's a success. And I think that the way Hollywood thinks about success today, there's not really a space for a filmmaker like Clint Eastwood making small, thoughtful, and commercially profitable movies.
I think about the research that has to go into something like that because you want to get it right. I mean, I guess the goal is that if let's say Clint Eastwood reads it, which he probably won't, but I mean, right. If he reads it, he looks up, he goes, yeah, he was dead on. He had me. I mean, how close do you think you were when you finished this book to go, I think I got him right?
I know I'm only offering a point of view. The subtitle of some of my other biographies is A Life. And that word A is the important one. I'm acknowledging that there could be another take on this story of this man's life. And in the case of Clint, the thing I would always love to hear from a subject of my book, and I heard this from one of them, was that I didn't remember that. And actually, that was an important thing when it happened, but I'd forgotten about it. And I'm so pleased that you nailed that bit of my life. And I think in Clint's case, anyone who reaches their 90s is going to forget so much of what happened. And movie makers and Hollywood stars, they live very big lives. It's not, they don't just know their neighbors and friends. They meet people every day from everywhere. And I like to think that I found some things about Clint's story that hadn't been in previous accounts of his life, but also that maybe he forgot. And he would appreciate that, there's now an accounting for something that mattered to him when it happened.
Well, I really appreciate talking with you, Shawn. Your book, Clint, the Man in the Movies, I'm sure it's on Amazon, it's on Kindle, it's on all that nonsense.
All the places.
All right.
Audiobook, whatever you like.
Well, it was great talking to you, Shawn. I look forward to reading your next book.
Thank you so much.